What's up everybody, this is Cecil Alexander with Jazz Lesson Videos. One thing that frustrated me when I was trying to learn jazz guitar was a lot of times I would be trying to learn different technical concepts or different line concepts, and I would oftentimes be viewing these things out of context. So I might understand how they work on paper, but I might not really understand how to apply them to a standard or a chord progression. So one thing we're going to try to help you with today is getting these concepts into your playing by seeing them in use over common jazz chord progressions and jazz standards. All of these examples are going to come from my latest resource with Jazz Lesson Videos, Advanced Soloing Techniques for Jazz Guitar. All of the examples are going to come with notation, tab, as well as recorded examples. You can feel free to use the coupon code TECH25 for an additional $25 off. So the first thing we're going to dive into is a sweeping pattern that you can use as a warm-up to get your right hand technique together. So let's jump into it. So the pattern is just going to be diatonic 7th arpeggios in 2 octaves. So we're going to start off with C major 7. So 1, 5, 3, 7, and then 1, 5, 3, 7 up the octave. And then we're going to move down as well. And if you notice, my right hand is doing mostly downward sweeping, and on the way up I'm using kind of an alternate pick hybrid kind of motion. So on the way down I'm using all downstrokes to cover those string changes, and then I do a hammer-on into C, or depending on the diatonic 7th arpeggio we're on, I might I'll do just the root, and then on the way up, still all downstroke sweeps, and then once I get to that 7th of each arpeggio, I'm going to do an upstroke, pull off back to the 5th. Upstroke on the 3rd, and then a downstroke on the root and a pull off to the 7th, and then upstroke on the 5th, downstroke on the 3rd, and then finally pull off into the root. So slowly, one more time, descending, and then on the way up, one more time. So I'm going to apply that to all the diatonic 7th arpeggios. This exercise I think is going to work on incorporating arpeggios into your soloing, because I think that when you're in the moment and you're soloing over, medium tempo or medium up tempo, a lot of times arpeggios can kind of break things up in the right hand in kind of an awkward way. So this is just going to ensure that you continue the forward motion in your 8th note lines. You can even incorporate these into 8th note triplet lines as well. So that was one of many warm-ups that I'll share with you in the full course. Now let's move on to a jazz guitar technique building exercise. The right hand is often kind of neglected in a lot of jazz guitar pedagogy, but it can really unlock a lot in terms of phrasing, articulation, and especially time feel. Our first concept is going to be downpicking, and we're going to take a look at one phrase that we're going to kind of break down and see what's going on. So starting with downpicking, we're going to be taking a look at a phrase on C7. And this phrase is going to be pretty straightforward and going to use a lot of idiomatic bebop vocabulary. But again, it's going to make use of all downpicking in the right hand, because I feel like this can really get us close to mimicking kind of a horn-like phrasing and articulation in our right hand. And then once the tempo increases, like once you get into medium up-tempo ranges or up-tempo ranges, you can start to add in upstrokes strategically where you see fit. But I would kind of lean on that downstroke articulation in the right hand because it's going to really help you swing in a very consistent way. There are players like Charlie Christian and Grant Green and even Wes Montgomery who played with his thumb but played primarily using downstrokes. And he really, all of those players really got a very kind of heavy weight to their 8th note that translates well to bebop playing and hard bop playing as well. So this phrase is going to start on the 3rd of C7, and then we're going to go up to the 4th. And kind of use sort of a G minor 7 arpeggio there. So we have that E that's going to be a half step below the flat 7th of that arpeggio, which is also the 4th of our C7. We go down D and B flat, Then we have two passing tones that are going to lead us into the root of the arpeggio. So A, F sharp into G. We're going to go up the scale to the flat seventh. So we have that fifth, sixth into the flat seventh. And then from there, we're going to play a 1, 2, 3, 5 melodic cell off the flat sevenths. So B flat, C, D, F. Then we have another kind of longer enclosure starting on A, F sharp up to A, and then finally landing on G. Then we move down chromatically to the fourth to put that on a strong beat, then resolve that to the third, leap down to the fifth on the fifth string, then we jump up to the ninth on the third string, chromatic approach note into the root, and then back down to the fifth, and then kind of a melodic ending starting on the flat seven and landing on the fifth. So a couple of things to keep in mind when you're down picking. Sometimes it's good to kind of give yourself a moment to reset with the right hand. And you can do so by using, little rhythmic decorations in your phrases, things like eighth note triplets and 16th notes kind of give your right hand a chance to reset. And it's good for endurance with the right hand, basically. So one more time, here's the full phrase slowly. And I would recommend practicing that in smaller chunks so that your right hand doesn't get too tired by just immediately trying to play it at your goal tempo. So maybe taking 4-note chunks or even measure long chunks and then trying to string it together so you can play the full thing up to speed. So now I'm going to improvise for a little bit just on a static C7 chord using only down picking. I'm going to try to work in some of the melodic concepts that I used in that 4-measure line that we just took a look at. So hopefully you were able to see with that section how you can use down picking to improve your time, feel, phrasing, and articulation. Now let's dive into some line building concepts from the course. So there are a couple concepts that you can add into your playing to create rhythmic variation in your phrases. One is going to be taking the pivot arpeggio that we mentioned in the last block and incorporating some eighth note triplets into it. So if we take those same pivot arpeggios, the ones that belong to that G dominant bebop scale, G7, B minor 7 flat 5, D minor 7, and F major 7, we can add a little bit of rhythmic variation by incorporating a passing tone before the second note of each arpeggio, then going up the remaining 3 notes as an eighth note triplet. So if I do that on G7, take the regular pivot arpeggio, then I add an A sharp before the B, and then go up B, D, and F as an eighth note triplet. So then do the same thing with B minor 7 flat 5. Find some different fingerings for it as well and get used to finding that sound in different places on the fretboard as always. Then D minor 7, D, F, A, C. I add an E before the F, and then F, A, C is an eighth note triplet. And then F major 7 as well. F, A, C, E. I add a G sharp before the A, and then A, C, and E are played as an eighth note triplet as well. So again, you could create a really long exercise through the entire fretboard that uses that rhythmic variation for those pivot arpeggios. So if we take this same thing from our previous lesson, and then add those rhythmic variations to the pivot arpeggios, we end up with this. And again, the idea is not to always have practical fingerings for it is to, kind of go through the mental math of that exercise as you're playing through it. And, maybe even you find some different fingerings every time you play through it. But the idea is that you're connecting the sound of that exercise to your ears, and it's going to make those shapes readily available when you're in the moment and improvising. So one more concept that you can use for rhythmic variation is going to be taking some common chromatic approaches and enclosures and adding rhythmic variation to those. So the idea is that you have, this set melodic block that you can incorporate into your phrases that's going to give you rhythmic variation, rather than thinking of, okay, let me play an eighth note triplet here, let me play a 16th note triplet here, some kind of eighth note variation. It's kind of like you have that wired in so that you already have that variation built into your lines. So if I take this kind of simple chromatic approach, say from the 5th to the flat 7th of G7, I'm going to do this as an eighth note triplet. Right, so if I go 1, 2, 3, 4. Right, so you can hear I'm just getting from that 5th to that flat 7th in just one beat, which is really practical for line playing, and it kind of creates, some melodic jumps and helps you break out of just playing the scale descending or just playing the arpeggios as is. So I could find this shape anywhere where I have a minor third within the scale, just because it's going to cover that minor third distance. So I could do it from the 6th to the root. I could do it from the 3rd to the 5th. Could do it from the 5th to the flat 7th, and from the 6th to the root. But I could even start outside of the scale and go inside of the scale, or start inside the scale and go outside of the scale. So starting outside of the scale and going in might be like from the flat 9 to the 3rd, or maybe even from the sharp 11 to the 6. That's kind of a common one that people play quite a bit. And remember that you can also do the same thing descending. So that would start inside the scale and go outside of the scale. So for example, going from the 6 to the sharp 11, and then maybe I chain that into a longer bebop scale line by going. One more time. So that's resolving the sharp 11 upwards to the 5th, and then just going down the bebop scale from there. Another example might be going from the 9th to the 4th or the 11th, resolving that to the 3rd, and then going down the scale from there. So, and then what if I add in one more minor third approach to that line? So from the 5th down to the 3rd. So you can find that shape a lot of different places, again, inside the scale, outside of the scale. It really helps add a little bit more forward motion to your lines. One final chromatic approach that has a little bit of rhythmic variation built into it is if we take this kind of simple enclosure, say going from the 6th up to the flat 7th. You may have heard that chromatic enclosure before. You have one step below our target, and then 2 steps above, back to 1 step below, and then finally our target of the flat 7th. So I'm going to add in a little trill between my pinky and my ring finger, and then finally get into my target that way. So you could play that as kind of a 16th note, starting on that F sharp, or even more of a 16th note triplet going into an 8th note. But the idea, again, is to find it in a lot of different places so that you can have that available anywhere. So I could do that going from, say, the 3rd to the 4th. I could do it going from, say, the sharp 9 to the 3rd. Again, you have options that are inside the scale, options that are outside of the scale. But I'd recommend creating sort of simple phrases that incorporate that linear idea. So maybe going from the sharp 4 to the 5th, and then going down the scale from there. Or the 6th to the flat 7th, and going down the scale from there, or maybe even the sharp 4 into the 5th.
So that concludes our video for today. I hope you got a lot out of that material. So the full course has over 20 videos for you to dig into, as well as quite a few other concepts to unpack. Again, feel free to use the coupon code TECH25 for an additional $25 off. Hope to see you next time.